Welcome to our first episode of Inclusive Justices, a sacred call for action. Here we bring together voices from diverse faith-based communities who are actively working towards justice, equity, and inclusivity. Our mission is to inspire and empower individuals and organizations to create inclusive religious and spiritual spaces where all are welcome and all are valued. Through storytelling, education, and critical conversations, we explore the intersection of faith and justice, challenging the prevailing systems and calling each of us to action in our shared pursuit of a more just, compassionate world. Today, we have Reverend Dr. Stringfellow, a leader in faith-based justice work. Thank you for being here today.
It is indeed my pleasure, yes.
You are the Director of Inclusive Justice?
Yes, the board president.
The board president. And I am the vice president. My name is Kelsey, Hector. Pronouns she, they.
And he, him.
Awesome. So what are we going to be talking about today?
A little bit about what is inclusive justice, but this whole series that you have created and other board members, we wanted to create podcasts that could be evergreen. In other words, that are not so much attached to a particular moment in time. But today, I think we're going to go a little bit more to the political climate in which we find ourselves in, because talk about a head snap or a neck snap, if you will. No one could really have seen what has happened. So I believe there, particularly for welcoming congregations, there are some topics that we need to engage.
I love that. And how about we start off? You said you want to say a little bit about, what we do at Inclusive Justice, who we are. Do you want to take a few minutes to do that?
Basically, we are Michigan's coalition of welcoming congregations. And so when you might ask the question, well, what is a welcoming congregation? Primarily, we reach out to LGBT individuals and families, but really it's anyone who has ever been excluded from a community, from the life of a church, a synagogue, or a mosque, based on who they are, based upon their identity. That there are congregations that stand toe-to-toe with other individuals to say, you are indeed welcome here. We see you, you're valuable, and come be not just a person who sits in a chair off in the corner, but even into the leadership of the congregation. And that is what we believe, and that's what we support.
I love that. And I just want to kind of set a container for our conversation, right? I want to make sure that we have a safe space. We may not agree on everything, but we're definitely going to get down to not only some opinions on different things, but also some action items that people can actually go out and physically do in our community or in our faith-based spaces, right? Regardless of you in your position of leadership or if you're just in the congregation, right? So, yeah.
And let me even expand upon that, because I've been doing this type of inclusion work really for the last 20 years. And one of the things that I recognize working with spiritual communities of different traditions or not traditions at all, that even using the word faith, that many organizations, social justice organizations, will use the word faith organizing as a way of kind of categorizing, putting that into a box of sorts.
Yeah.
But when you speak with the leaders and the peoples of those communities, that using the word sacred is a better frame, to say that because faith oftentimes is connected to a Christian-based belief, system, and but sacred is something that really kind of cuts across all different traditions and beliefs, or as I said, non-beliefs, if you will, and thus we've used that term sacred activism to really capture what it is that we do, which is not just simply, preaching to the choir of sorts, but to take what we have to the streets to have impact on public policy and local, state, national in that regard. So I just want to throw that out in terms of using the frame of sacred and sacred activism.
We can definitely reframe that. We all have different vocabulary, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's good to kind of get that out in the beginning. So my first question, as a leader in sacred-based justice work, how do you see the role of religious and spiritual communities in addressing, addressing the rise of white supremacy and racial systemic injustice.
And and that's a pretty loaded question. I'm glad we're
It
beginning
is.
with it.
It's big.
We're
starting big.
We are starting big, especially in this political season of 2024. This is when this is being taped. We have, as I said, a neck snapped situation where Joe Biden was running on the Democratic side, Donald Trump is on the Republican side, but then he decides to step down. Kamala Harris steps up. And because of that kind of stirred the sleeping dragon even more so on, I'm going to just say conservative sides, where they will utilize racial or racist tropes and name calling. And that's been the tactic for quite some time. And that is a dog whistle to many folks. The reason why I think it's important for us to really to discuss it is, I would say 2 decades ago. I mean, you can even go back even during the Reagan era and even Eisenhower and even prior to that, when you think about political organizing and that it's very tribal, that the whole concept of I want my country back.
Yeah.
What does that really mean, your country back? And really what that means, it is that racial undertone.
Yeah.
That you have foreigners, outsiders, people who really, don't belong here, trying to come in and take what you feel belongs to you. Completely overlooking, going all the way back to indigenous people.
Yeah, absolutely. Because
not having
last
those
time I checked, my ancestors didn't stem from here. But
absolutely. But nonetheless, you want to put that aside.
Yeah.
And then again, I want my country back, and let's make America great again. So I would say, depending on how you were raised, you hear those phrases quite differently.
Absolutely.
And if you're Caucasian, you would hear that. It's like, well, I can kind of understand how that can be offensive to some people.
Yeah.
But again, it is kind of what it is. But if you are a person of color in this country, and to hear that is like an offense that comes for you and the target on your back, as well as looking at all of the racial violence, at the hands of authorities.
Absolutely.
George Floyd forward, George Floyd back.
Yeah.
But the George Floyd murder was that inflection point that a lot of people started to look and talk more so, not about white privilege, but white supremacy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why we're talking about this, absolutely, why we're talking about this is because it has gone into the whole concept of Christian nationalism.
Absolutely.
Which is also a part of a supremacy that might makes right, and sometimes white makes right. And that when we're talking about evangelicals, not even so much talking about black evangelicals, it's white evangelicals. And that this whole concept of having the Christian faith with patriotism, American patriotism,
yeah,
that they're in a sense one and the same.
Yeah.
And that if you don't subscribe to that particular ideology, then there's something wrong with you. You are then the other. You're the one that we're going to target. You're the one that needs to be silenced.
Absolutely. And I find it really interesting, as someone who comes from a long line of generationally poor people. America Great Again. I don't recall in the last few ancestors removed when it was even great for poor people in this country. And so I think that, I think you use the term like the snap of the neck, right? It's interesting to me, the whiplash that one gets, because too soon we forget of all this classist, systemic racial injustices that have happened. And what are we going back to? What exactly? Like, I wish that we could get a defined list of what exactly do you want? Because I think we'll quickly find out that what they want is not actually what they're asking for, right? That like concept that sometimes, behind the smile is something pretty wicked. And
Well, and I love what you just said, because, again, issues and topics, patriotism and military
Yeah.
and police, protection and so forth, that all of that, particularly during January 6th,
oh yes,
crumbled as you had this mob, go after military and patriotism and the police force and so forth. So really, what are you standing
yeah,
for?
exactly.
And another symbol is the presidency of the United States.
Yeah.
And so back when Barack Obama was president, how then Speaker Mitch McConnell, not Speaker on the Senate side, Mitch McConnell, blocked his selection, his right to select a Supreme Court justice.
Yeah.
Well, he did select, but it never even got to the vote.
They stalled it so that it wouldn't get to it.
Right. And so during that time, it's like, we wondered, it's like, how can you even do that? He's the president of the United States. That is not only his right, but that's his role.
Yeah.
But you can even ascend to the highest level of in the world, highest role of the world, and still be treated as a boy.
Yeah.
And why do I say that? Is because we don't care who you are. And even though you're in this position that we, revered, President of the United States, but because a black person, the first one to be in that role, we're going to still put you in your place and tell you what you can and what you cannot do.
And I think that we see the same kind of thing happening right now, where like this attack on blackness, right? And so what was it? A few weeks ago, Donald Trump had said something about Kamala Harris, where it was like, well, she was Indian, but now all of a sudden she's black. And it's just like, for me, wow, it doesn't surprise me, but it saddens me, because you have this spectacle of the Olympics where you see all this really beautiful black joy coming out of all these female athletes.
Correct.
And then you have this beautiful woman who has done a lot of work for the last, her whole career, her whole life. And that blatant attack is just like super frustrating. And I don't understand. Like, let's talk about the policies, right? Let's talk about the actual things that matter, not who someone's identity is, because when has that mattered for any, upper middle class white man that has been in any position, besides when you look at, the language around when we talk about like JFK being our first Catholic president.
Right.
So we know what that means, right?
Right.
And so it's interesting to me to see all these connections.
Well, particularly when a nation has been comfortable with the status quo.
Yeah.
That when something indeed happens that's different, having, the first African-American president, then again, I want my country back. I don't know what this is. But now here we are in 2024, and I'm not saying this is brand new. Like I mentioned, Reagan and, even other Republican leaders prior.
Yeah.
But this whole movement of MAGA is something that I believe none of us could, I won't say foresee that I think that's a little naive. It has been growing. What we didn't recognize is how it would then eat, as being the monster that it is, the Republican Party.
Oh, absolutely.
And so again, when you had, Democrats and Republicans on either side, that this morph of what MAGA has become, that it is now commonplace to use not only the N-word, particularly because it's Kamala Harris, you cannot separate her race from her gender.
Yeah.
And all the gender attacks that have happened.
Oh, yes.
And not only upon her as a symbol, she's been now a symbol of all of what I think MAGA has been so afraid of. It's one thing to be afraid of, a Barack Obama, but now you got like, a black woman, a black, a South Indian woman as well, all wrapped up. you made mention of her background and, say, oh, we don't know much about Kamala. She's been, quiet and, all the other
but she
stuff that
has
they've
not.
been saying.
Yeah.
And then again, if you take a look at, again, her resume.
Yeah.
And all that she has done, it goes all the way back, and I'm sure you've heard this before about from many people of color have been told that you have to be twice as good to get even half of the recognition.
Yeah.
From employers, from teachers, from society as a whole.
Absolutely.
And you have to be this mega star to get to where you are. And still, well, she's stupid, or she laughs too much, and all the other things that they criticize. But even, I love her VP pick of Tim Walz. I love Tim Walz.
Yes.
But even going back to the selection that they told her that, well, it has to be a white man, though. It has to be a white man. There are other qualified African-American legislators that are there, and even qualified women.
Yeah.
Gretchen
Whitmer. Yeah.
But nonetheless,
Big Gretch,
it's like, no, you can't have two women.
Yeah.
You can't have black on black. No. So,
because that's too many intersectionalities, too much diversity.
Well, but again,
just...
you have to, whatever you do, you have to appeal to white America.
Yeah.
And so, is that white privilege? Could be. That is why I'm saying I believe this is white supremacy, because it is this supremacist thought that even though she's going to, and will, I believe, ascend to the highest, role in the world.
Yeah.
That, again, you can't do that unless you appeal to white America.
Yeah. And I think, too, what we forget, especially my background is I'm a UU, right? Unitarian Universalist. And so when I look at someone who has a lot of intersectionalities and a lot of diverse perspectives, it reminds me that we all are interconnected. And so as a teacher, I know that if I have an accessible classroom, it doesn't matter that I'm teaching to the kids that need those accessibility. All of the kids are going to benefit from it because it's necessary, right? It helps bring people in. And I don't think that some of us realize you don't have to have a white man up there to meet your needs as a public, because she's going to, they, he, whoever, they're going to do it, right? They have a platform that they're standing on. Look beyond that. But we can't. Like, we're just too caught up in that cycle of violence, right? That cycle of oppression. And unfortunately, I think it's in our foundation. And so that's going to be a lot of work. And I want to kind of push us towards the moral responsibility of religious communities when it comes into that. And so I know that this country has a long historical background of having religious communities step in to support different movements, or different marginalized communities being supportive in different ways. I mean, we saw it with MLK, right? We saw it with the sanctuary movement. And so I'm just wondering what you think their responsibility, any religious community's responsibility, with taking up this mantle.
Absolutely. And I believe there is and should be a distinction between, the church and the state. I do support that. However, when you think about movements that really have made a difference in this country for social justice, social change, it has been through, religious or that sacred activism, as I talked about.
Yeah.
You can look at, what Gandhi did and others. But and I love the fact that you mentioned MLK, because again, that was, the civil rights movement was birthed in the black church.
It definitely was.
And again, it's that religious conviction saying that, when people want to say that you are less than, you're 3/5 of a human being. No, I am a man.
Yeah.
And the reason why, because I know my God has created me in God's image, and I am all of who I am. And so thus, I'm going to fight not only for my right to say I'm a human being, but for everyone's right as well. And that is a religious or a spiritual sacred conviction that, does that. So thus, the role of religious communities, I think, is vital, because oftentimes when people say, well, this is my conviction, this is the reason why, da 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 da. What we found, particularly on that, as I talked about on the Christian nationalist side, is that they want to also hijack the name of God or religion as a whole and saying, that's that might makes right. And those of us on the progressive end of the spectrum can also say, you know what, that's right. It is my spiritual conviction. It is my, sacred conviction that says I'm going to stand up for the humanity of all individuals. It's not, the fair-haired child versus, the bald-headed stepchild who's off in the corner somewhere. It's like, no.
It's like liberation for all.
Liberation for everybody. And that is why I really believe the role of religious communities, congregations, churches, mosques, synagogues. It's one thing to kind of sit on the sideline to just let well enough alone and just go along to get along.
Yeah.
Because again, you're more interested in the paint color or the curtains or paying off the debt for the building. All that is very important. But why do we exist? Why are we here? And is it just, as I love to say in my congregation, is it just for us four and no more?
Ooh, I
Meaning
like that.
everyone who looks like us. We send our kids to the same schools. We drive the same cars. We belong to the same organizations. And that's how you're going to make it here in this community. Or do you have a more inclusive and expansive definition of what is the beloved community?
Yeah.
As you're welcoming people of difference in, people of various intellectual abilities, and genders and sexual orientations and gender expressions, and not be threatened by that.
Absolutely.
How is that a threat to you? And oftentimes people feel that it is. And so I believe this is why we need to have this type of sacred activism organizing here in the state of Michigan.
I love that. I just want to, while you were talking, I was thinking about the Black church, right?
Mm-hmm.
And something that kept popping into my head is that I don't think anyone could have done that movement better, because I think they're the only church that could bring the spirit from the church and bring the spirit into the streets, right? And so I think that the energy, that, recollection in my mind of what I've learned and seen gives me hope.
That, but the oppression.
Yeah.
As well. That's the heart, the engine, the secret sauce, if you will. And I kind of have that in a positive way, but because when you think of oppression, it's Billie Holiday had a song, "Good Morning Heartache."
Yeah.
Come on in and sit down, and being having ancestors who were enslaved. That type of body memory and soul memory gets passed down.
Yeah.
And so when you get sick and tired of being sick and tired, and you have courageous voices, prophetic voices, really what you're talking about as well.
Yeah.
Prophetic voices to say that I've read the sacred text.
Yeah.
And the sacred text has inspired me to give you this message to say we are, we're not less than, we're more than conquerors. And so again, with that, let's organize. And I was just at a conference not too long ago, and a bishop said, your hell no needs to be as strong as your prayers.
Yeah.
It's like, hell no, I'm not doing that.
Yep.
I'm not putting up with that. I'm not,
that boundary.
And recognizing, particularly as people of color, but particularly Black individuals, when you say that hell no up to against white supremacy, you're taking your life into your own hands.
Yeah.
And you can have that type of backlash. But again, when you look at all the spiritual saints that have come before us, all the martyrs who have come before us, and what they what they did, that spiritual conviction to say, I'm going to stand in the gap. I'm going to speak up from truth. I'm going to speak truth to power.
And risk your own life in doing so.
And risk my own life and doing it. Why? Because I've been oppressed.
Yeah.
My family's been oppressed. My community has been oppressed. And we're going to stand up and speak out and say, hell no to this.
I think that's a beautiful position too, because you have to think it's like the same. It reminds me of the analogy of the person that plants the oak tree doesn't plant it for themselves, right?
Yes.
And so it's the same kind of thing. The person standing up, the prophetic voice. Prophets aren't popular.
Sure enough.
Right? They're not
That's right.
popular, not in their time at least.
Mm-hmm.
Takes us usually a while to be like, oh, that person knew, right? And that's a really dangerous place to be. It's an important place. It's a necessary place, but it's a very, very dangerous place to be. And I think that acknowledging that is really important too, because we don't want to, be blind to what that means and what, the people on the front line are doing. We want to acknowledge that and, support in any way that we possibly can.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, as as something else that you said, when you think about progressive congregations, does not matter if it's, a Jewish congregation, a Muslim congregation, a Christian congregation, UU congregation, is that you really are putting yourself at risk as well because you're going against the status quo.
Yeah.
Religion as a whole is talking about a particular practice, a practice that's in a box. And this is how we know that I'm a Methodist. This is how I know I'm a Catholic. This is how I know. And for you to step outside of that, you put yourself at risk.
Yeah.
And there's often a cost that comes along with it, which then goes back to the whole reason why it's good to have a coalition of congregations that stand toe to toe to say, if you hurt, we hurt.
Absolutely.
And we're going to be there and we're going to support you. And so if you have something that's happening in your rural part of the state, let us know so we can be there.
Yeah.
And then, and if it's something that we all need to come together, then we're going to march together at the Capitol to make sure our voices are heard and we're representing those voices who oftentimes don't get represented.
Absolutely. I think something that you had said connects to the next point. We're definitely going to talk about Project 2025, right? And what that kind of means for racial justice, systemic inequities. But also, when we're talking about profits, we're talking about aligning your sacred or religious life with your political life. That can be a slippery slope, especially when we look at leaders of Christian nationalist spaces holding that same mantle, right? But through their eyes, their justice looks a lot different than what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
Right? And so I kind of want to talk about that tension. And I also want to talk about the Project 2025 and what that, if enacted, will do, especially to, even religious spaces, sacred spaces, but also in the queer community, in, Black communities, for people of color, for women. So
a lot of the leaders of the Christian nationalist movement often are the same ones who are the leaders in the Christian fundamentalist movement. They're one and the same. That there was this gathering of James Dobson of Focus on the Family fame and others of his ilk that gathered to put together almost a precursor for what Project 2025 is today.
Yeah.
To recognize that, one, there are going to be bedfellows with the Republican Party.
Yeah. And I know that the Heritage Foundation has really deep roots, right?
Absolutely.
So we have Roe v. Wade being, passed at the Supreme Court, and then all of a sudden we have this organizing happening of conservatives, especially really wealthy conservatives, because I don't know about you, but I believe that without slave labor, capitalism dies. And so I think that's a fact that some people know, and they've been preparing for a long time. I mean, Project 2025 is not a brand new thing, right? It's not something they just popped up last year.
Correct.
It's been in the making, as you were talking about, for many years. And some of us are not surprised, but I know some are. And so...
Well, in this year of 2024, we don't really even use the term religious liberty much.
Yeah.
5 years or so ago, everyone was talking about it.
Yeah.
You know. And so I think for the novice ear, when you hear religious and liberty, oh, well, religion is good and liberty is good, you know, what's the problem with that? Well, again, those who have been the architect of and proponents of Christian nationalism, that when religious liberty first came to be, and you may or may not know this, it started as a court case supporting indigenous folks the right for them to have peyote, smoke
Yes.
peyote, because it was part of their religious practice. And back when Clinton was president, that here was something that you could have a bipartisan support of saying, you know, we need to have religious liberty.
Yeah.
And what it meant then is to, like, you know, we can't impose one person's religion over someone else's. Everyone should have that type of religious freedom and liberty.
Yeah.
What has transpired since then is for folks to come on to say that there is one particular viewpoint, if you will, or worldview, and that is the Christian one.
Yeah.
And that if you go against that, and in particular, if you try to silence me as I'm, quote unquote, you know, having my Christianity, living out my Christianity, then, you know, you're infringing on my religious liberty.
Yeah.
Which is completely different than how it started out as. So I engage in what I called liberating religious liberty, which is one, doing an education on what it was,
Yeah.
and how it has evolved today. You know, and that, again, understanding the role of Christian nationalism, because it is interwoven throughout, which a large part of that makes up Project 2025
Yeah.
today. That, again, if people just said, well, you're just talking about religion, right? No. Because part of what this has impacted the Supreme Court.
Absolutely.
Which, as you said, about, you know, the overturn of Roe v. Wade. I would even say the overturn of not religious liberty, but when it comes to racial discrimination.
Oh, yeah.
What is it? Where people called it quotas at one point. I wish my mind was working right now, but
my brain is blank too. It's okay. I get what you're talking about.
It'll come to me. But basically, it is, again, going after women.
Yeah.
Going after the LGBT community, going after, you know, Black folks in particular, but people of color in general, going after, you know, those of Mexican heritage.
Yeah.
And then seeing them as other. And
when in
again,
reality they're
yeah.
indigenous. Like they're indigenous to
right,
this land.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And, you know, and so to you know, that this is religion, right? It's like, do you see how this is this, you know, this erasure?
Yeah, it's all interconnected.
Of people who are, quote unquote, different from who? Different from Christian? No. Different, particularly from white evangelical Christians. So, affirmative action. That's what I was trying to spit out earlier. The dismantling of affirmative action.
Which is horrible, because you have so much beautiful things happening right now. And the one thing that, and I think it was the case where it was either a loan or grant that went to Black women, either in school or entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I heard about this.
And it was seen as I can't imagine. I think there was a woman during the George Floyd, I can't remember her name, but she talked about playing a game of Monopoly and not being allowed to collect money multiple times around, right? And then being able to collect money, and then all of a sudden someone takes it away from you. And then you have to go around the board a few more times while all the other players are amassing wealth and you're not allowed to. And then finally you get to the point where you're allowed to, and then we have programs that can even the slate even just a little bit, right? And you just take it away because it's not fair.
Yeah.
It's wild to me.
Yeah.
And I think one of the biggest problems, I know that my family, unfortunately, a lot of them are very conservative. And it's almost like they think that we were raised poor, we experienced poverty, that all of our hardship that we've come up until now is going to be completely erased. It's not going to matter, right? Because we didn't experience that. And it's like, no, that is not that's not how that works, right? Your pain is not erased because someone else's oppression is observed. It's or acknowledged, right? And I think it's a really hard thing to get around because in our culture, we're very individualized. We're very egocentric. We put ourselves in the middle instead of putting ourselves around community. And so it's really easy to get wrapped up in the propaganda that is this hate speech that's moving through our country. Not for the first time, definitely probably will not be the last time, unfortunately. It's sad. And back to the point I said before, our liberation is tied all together. It really, really is. And so I have hope that maybe even just from this conversation, if one person can hear it, right? And just slightly think about things differently. You don't have to change your mind. You just have to, oh, okay, I didn't think about that, right? But as we talk about like MAGA spaces and we talk about Project 2025, I want to talk about this oppositional force that happens when you have conversations with people on the other side, right? And so how, as a religious person or in sacred spaces, how do you kind of traverse that? How do you move through?
Yeah. Well, Tim Walz, he was giving a speech the other day and talked about how he was looking forward to having Thanksgiving dinner conversations that weren't weird. It just weren't,
the Midwest weird.
Right. You just, on one side and, Uncle Bob and, Aunt Jane or whatever, like, oh my God. And that is a very real concern because again, it's almost who is shouting the loudest.
Yeah. We often cater to them, right?
Absolutely.
I know that
who's the angriest?
Yep. Uncle Joe is real upset. And, if we get him more upset, then we're all going to have to deal with him. So we're just going to tiptoe around him and make sure not to say anything. Or like the thing that comes to my mind is the uncle your young daughter can't wear shorts around. Same kind of concept. It's like we have to stop catering to the unruly, non-moving people, even if they are our loved ones.
Yeah.
For me, I hope that my loved ones hold me accountable because I don't ever want to be in a space where one, I make someone uncomfortable or I make a space so negative that people can't even hear themselves because they're too worried about catering and making sure to step around me.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And there's a book out now by the author Tim Alberta. The Kingdom, the Power, the Glory. And it talks about white evangelicalism. And, and someone who's listened to this conversation is like, well, this is pretty political. Like, what is this that? I thought this was about religion or faith or sacred. You talked about sacred a few moments ago. It has everything to do with it because let's go back to the angry uncle at the dinner table that understand that angry uncle is then also going to a congregation full of angry people.
Full of other angry uncles? Yeah.
Yeah, and mothers and children, but more importantly, the leaders who are spewing this type of division and this type of Christian nationalism where, again, it's about us four and no more.
Yeah.
That, and even if you do have people of color in that community, in order for them to fit, they have to submit, if you will, I'm going to use that word intentionally, submit to a particular mindset and way of thinking.
Yeah.
Where, again, you are the subservient here in this group. But again, you just have a lot of people, again, going to worship, going to congregations, going to synagogue, angry.
Yeah.
Angry. So why are you so angry? This is the place where you should be releasing that tension.
Yeah.
And seeing your siblings.
Finding as spiritual
one.
Equilibrium.
Right.
Yeah.
And we're not seeing that a lot now. In fact, again, we're becoming even more and more divided when it comes to this public worship, this public, religious space. And I think, again, it is so critical for us not to get into a us versus them conversation or to put a cage around someone else, because when you put a cage, it was like, you're a racist, Uncle Joe, or you're a white supremacist, Uncle Joe. that puts Uncle Joe into that cage that he can't get out. You're just going to, just gonna continue to be angry behind bars.
Yeah.
But again, going back to your point earlier, like, how do you do that? It's having these courageous conversations.
Yeah.
That even though Thanksgiving may be incredibly difficult, go anyway.
Yeah.
And, not go to provoke, but also not go to apologize either.
Yeah.
Again, if you're wearing the shorts and they're like, then again, it's aren't I a part of this family too?
Yeah. I have a hard time with that personally, because sometimes I do go to provoke. I'll be very honest. I got just a little bit of petty in me that knows, but I know because I've experienced, I'm 32, so I've experienced a lot of holidays where coming into a space, they already know what I'm coming in with, right? They already know what baggage I'm coming in, and I know what baggage they're coming in with. And so instead of meeting each other at this middle ground and being like, let's talk about it, but talk. I don't want scream and match, right?
Yeah.
I remember one time I told my uncle that this is well back in my early 20s, that, I was in my libertarian phase, okay? And I was a libertarian, and I was like, yeah, I'm a libertarian. And he got so mad at me, he screamed at me. I mean, screamed, like just full guttural spitting, because he was confused that I was a liberal. And then at first, I was very confused, one, because it took me a while to process it, to be like, first, what in the heck, what is wrong with me being a liberal anyways? But two, why are you so hurt, right? Like, what's behind that hurt that makes you lash out this way? One, emotional regulation. So maybe we should be having conversations at the Thanksgiving table or dinner table about, hey, this is how we, regulate our emotions, right? Because I think that's a big issue. But two, seeing each other as human. As we often talk about the inherent dignity and worth of all people. And that can be really, really hard when it is violence that is coming from the person that you're supposed to, see have worth and dignity. But
well, and I admire people like you who have the courage and the articulation to go and to know what to say. I also respect the person who says, I don't know what to say. Go ahead and go anyway. Yeah. And I respect the person who says, you know what, I can't be around that.
Absolutely. If you know your boundaries.
Right, you know your boundaries, because at the end of the day, this is about self-preservation.
Absolutely. I do want to, something that I'm reminded of is oftentimes in those conversations, I don't talk to them, right? So I can't remember who said it, but they're like, I'm not talking to you or your next generation. I'm actually talking to the one after that, because that's the one that's going to listen, kind of thing. And so that your nieces, your nephews, your cousins are running around. And so even if that conversation is heard, not by the person you're talking with, but the people around that are definitely listening, right? Maybe that will make some sort of difference, in changing.
Well, and one of the things that we haven't talked about is almost taking this as a given of the whole concept of LGBT inclusion.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes I have spoken to very conservative Black audiences, Black congregations, around the whole topic of inclusion. That even though right now we've been talking about more the political sense, but what I just heard you say is also can be applied to individuals who say, either it's the ick factor, icky, I don't want to do that, or it's their religious conviction that says this is why I'm standing against the LGBTQ plus community, or whatever it is. But I think the important thing is, how do you even have those conversations when you have such deep ideological as well as spiritual differences?
Absolutely.
And the way I feel, and I've had these conversations with both clergy and laity, is that it comes down to this whole concept of our common humanity. Yeah. That I normally ask clergy, why did you become, a pastor, a clergy in the first place? And oftentimes they will respond, because I want to see I want to help people to be better, or, to help other people thrive or whatever. Yeah. So, okay, if you knew that something you would say or do would hinder that, would that at least give you pause? And by me doing that, and I say a lot more than that, but that's it in a nutshell, is that I then appeal to their sensibility of their calling to be a pastor, their calling to be a clergy person.
Yeah.
And I think, appealing to the family member, to the uncle, meaning we're related on some, in some form or fashion. Now, if you choose not to see me as a relative of yours, even though we are, then, blessings to you.
Yeah, there's nothing you can really
But
do.
if you do still recognize me as part of this tribe, then there are certain that's the base. You kind of you get rid of all the various arguments, political, religious, whatever. Get it back down to the base of who are we to each other?
Yeah.
How do we relate to each other? Let's start there, and then start trying to build out in terms of the commonness.
And I mean, that's really beautiful. And that's a privilege in of itself, right? Just to be able to have someone that allows you in a space, right? I know a lot of queer and, especially like trans people, especially because it's definitely political, right?
Absolutely.
And their existence is in question every day, right? Their right to exist. And that doesn't just stop at the political, that also goes into families, right? And just having a safe space. And so sometimes the church, the synagogue, the spiritual place is the only family that is available for people who lost something because of them just living as they are. And oftentimes we equate Christian values, Christian national values with churches, and there's a lot of religious trauma, but there's also so many really beautiful spaces like your church, which is in Ferndale, correct?
Correct.
And other churches all around Michigan that include, accept, celebrate, right?
Yes.
So I just wanted to kind of bring point to that.
I'm glad you said that, because that brings us full circle to how we began our conversation today, which, again, having welcoming congregations that, not only welcome LGBTQ plus individuals, but anyone who's been excluded. You talked about trans-identified folk. And if I'm speaking to a conservative clergy person and to say, here's somebody over here who was a member of your congregation, there was a relationship there once upon a time, but they no longer feel welcomed. They no longer feel valued. They're being seen as less than.
Yeah.
For some, not all. For some, if you point that out to them, because they're not looking at being LGBTQ plus as thumbing your nose up at God and I'm just going to be who I'm going to be, who I want to be, and when I want to be, da-da-da. It's like, no. Let's understand that this is part of their core identity. Helping them recognize, again, their humanity rather than the other.
Yeah.
That's how you begin to have different change those hearts and minds and so forth. Now, again, there are some, and we've been talking about also within this time, who are so bedrocked in their Christian nationalism belief that, might makes right. That, trying to have that type of tender conversation of relationship, they're not hearing that.
No, they're not in the mind frame to hear that, right?
But for others who are, like I said, and they, quote unquote, may identify as conservative.
Yes.
Or, evangelical.
Well, I know that in our last event, last October, we had, and I think he said he's been to multiple events, was a Catholic man who is more in a conservative space, right? Still shows up, still wants to learn. And so I think that goes to telling exactly what you're talking about.
Absolutely. Those are the individuals we can be in relationship with. You can, quote unquote, preach to the choir, but then there are others who genuinely, their spiritual, religious, sacred convictions, saying, I don't want to see someone hurt.
Yeah.
I don't want to see someone left out. Now we can have a dialogue.
Yeah.
There are others who are not even in that place, and I think it's still good for us to challenge that type of thinking, but in terms of healing conversations, healing dialogues, courageous conversations, is those who you can say, but you know me.
Yeah.
And this is our relationship. Let's build there.
I think it's really hard sometimes to have restorative or generative conflict with people, right? Oftentimes when we hear conflict, we think of like this destructive force, but it definitely doesn't have to be that way. It can be generative, it can be restorative, but you have to come to the table not expecting or wanting the destructive part. And I mean, that's hard. Yeah. I know from my own past experience, sometimes I'm still mad and I'm not ready, even though my brain's like, no, we're going to go have that conversation. It's like, oh no, you need to take a moment because you are not ready for that. You're just going to make it all worse, right?
Yeah.
And so I wanted to kind of bring it back to the political realm, because you know me, and I gotta have the other coin of this conversation, right? And so when we're looking at the Democratic Party, they're often seen as like a counter to these conservative movements, but it's to face a lot of criticism for not making substantial progress on issues of racial and systemic injustices. I know I wrote down a James Baldwin quote that is like, he says, "You always told me it takes time. It takes my father's time, my mother's time, my uncle's time, my brother's and my sister's time, my nieces and my nephew's time. How much time do you want for your progress?" And so I really think about this position because the Democratic Party historically promises a lot, and then there's a lot of failure. And so you have a position where we have decreasing numbers in congregations, right? We have this mistrust of both parties, especially with younger voters or, younger community members. And so how do you see us grappling with this conversation, especially when we both know it's imperative to have a safe space to make progress and push forward, and a religious space is a fulfilling, or a sacred space is a fulfilling space to do that in. So how do we navigate this, especially?
And what you have your finger on with your question is really at the heart of what progress, being progressive is all about. It is the next generation. It is the younger generation that will come and say, you know what, this doesn't fit me. This no longer works for me. And whether it is a congregation or whether it's a political party.
Yeah.
And to begin to have other people coalesce around that idea and that concept. And what invariably happens, because it's life, is that then the young then grow to be in power, and then the young become the old, and then the next generation will then come and they will challenge that. And so and I think if you are indeed a progressive person, there's going to be someone who's going to come along and challenge the way you've done things, or the way you thought, or but this is how we always, because I think that is a human nature thing, which some are more bedrocked in that, thus conservatives, than progressives. But nonetheless, I think to be open to younger voices, next generations, stepping out of the way so someone else can step in. And, you don't have to be like, well, my way is the better way, but how can I help mentor you?
Yeah.
So, you won't have to necessarily make the same mistakes that I did. And it is up to you to either take my advice or not.
And I often get frustrated for me because politically they're not getting out of the way. Democrats and Republicans, it does not matter what side of the aisle you are on. We have the oldest ruling power that we've ever had. And so it's frustrating because you have Gen Z coming right up after us millennials, but most of us millennials haven't even got a chance to put our name on anything and makes the change that we want, right? And we're expected to tell the next generation, well, you got to take power next, when we haven't, right? And so how are we going to give them hope when, they haven't even stepped out of the way yet?
That's right.
And how in the world, because we're talking upper, how old is Joe Biden? That's so far from even me, 32, right? There's so much that's happened in that time frame. And it drives me nuts because what are we supposed to do? Just wait for them to die? you know, and not to be morbid or anything, but it is frustrating. And the point that you said, as a teacher, you always learn stuff from your kids too, right?
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes we forget that it's back and forth. It's this reciprocal relationship.
Yeah.
And we just got to give trust
Yes.
and space for that. And in some spaces in this country, we are not ready for that.
So I would like to give a practical example of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So, and that's you and I.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned your age. I'm 55.
Okay.
And, here I am, the president, you're the vice president. And you and Vivian, who is producing this, thank you, Vivian, for your work, are the new faces, the younger faces for this progressive spiritual movement in the state. And you both came and said, when I took over leadership, we were very accustomed to doing a lot of conferences and marches and rallies at the Capitol and so forth. COVID happened. Then, that kind of changed everything. And, we started to, we didn't get together as much as we once did. Here comes along, two very energetic young people who are saying, I have a great idea how we can do this that's more, technologically.
Yeah.
And, hence what we're doing here today. The inauguration of the evolvement of sacred activism in the state of Michigan, doing it like this.
Yeah.
And recognizing and teaching this old dog a new trick of how many more people we can impact by doing a podcast.
Yeah.
And, and doing things more video than we can simply saying, okay, on such and such a date and such a time, we're going to meet at the Capitol. Not saying there's anything wrong with that, because there are times we need to have our voices and our bodies, and to use a war metaphor, boots on the ground kind of.
Yeah, and if we up our audience, especially young people, action is definitely deep in our vocabulary, and we want it, right? And so I love that, the transition. I question, how old is Inclusive Justice?
We were founded in 2012.
2012, okay.
Yeah. And so when you look at that, it's, a little over a decade, old. But this type of religious organizing, precedes even us. When you look at what various other congregations have done, not only here in the state, but nationwide. And so this is our attempt here in the state of Michigan to bring these various movements, religious movements for justice together. Yeah. And not saying that, we're are in competition with the, Episcopalians or with the Methodists or the Lutherans per se. Is to say, no. We, are a para organization. We want to work alongside of you. Yeah. To support
in this with
you.
Everybody.
We want to highlight and amplify what you are currently doing, so that that you don't have to be an Episcopalian to engage in some of your justice work, because justice work should impact everyone. And so
Absolutely.
Let's have a vehicle in the state that can really amplify that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the last kind of point that I wanted to make, first off, great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to talk about more like physical, practical steps that, congregations, communities, individuals can take, especially around the topic of racial injustice and the election coming up, right?
So if you go to our website, generally we list what we call the best practices of inclusion, and that's primarily around the LGBT welcome and inclusion, which many congregations are in different stages of that. There are some who have been practicing that for several decades. Yeah. And others are just putting their small toe into the water, and so we want to, in a sense, be there around. Be there for them around those issues. What we now would love to do and feel like it's our mandate to do is not just simply talk about inclusion of LGBT, but around racial justice, around gender justice. And so again, not that we are doing the work around reproductive justice in Michigan, but we support those who do. And when they're having a rally, that we're going to show up.
Yeah.
And so when other folks are going to be doing racial justice or even water justice, whatever, let's show up. Let's be there. Because again, it's not so much about inclusive justice reinventing the wheel or creating another organization that's going to be in competition with others, but to say we want to partner with you on that, and we and how we partner is to let other people in other parts of the state recognize, hey, this is happening.
Yeah.
And especially if you have an ear and a strategy that maybe works better in a rural area.
Absolutely.
Or on the west side of the state. Let's then share those best practices together around, not just around LGBT inclusion, but around racial justice, gender justice, reproductive justice, and the like. Again, to make this state that we call home the most inclusive and most welcoming place that it can be.
Absolutely. Well, is there other stories, anything else that you want to share before we kind of wrap up this first inaugural episode?
The only thing I just want to say again is, Kelsey, thank you, because again, this is, part of your baby, your brainchild, you and Vivian's as well. And I think we are off to a great next new chapter of what this organization can be. So I look forward to hearing all the other conversations that you're going to be having with some other dynamic leaders throughout the state of how they're working for justice and inclusion here in our state as well.
Absolutely. So for any listeners, we definitely do have a few more episodes coming up. Also, if you have a story to tell, if you have tips, pointers, anything for the larger community that is Michigan, don't be afraid to reach out to us. We would love to have you on the podcast, or even if we want to shoot some stuff out on social media or through our newsletter about different things that you're doing in your local community. We always love to hear it. So thank you.
Thank you.